this particular instance with Jamal, he's a little older. Statistics have shown, and I think Dr. Magency mentioned this at the beginning, that children, Black and brown children, as young as 3rd and 5th grade. So what is that? You're talking about 8, 9 years old, start to have thoughts of suicide. So I hope everyone that is here, that is an adult, has a child close by that is also here, because even though it's not something you are possibly talking to them about in your home, it may be something they're already battling with. So this could be the beginning of a very, very important conversation to have with the youth that are in your lives. So let's start our Q&A off with Mrs. Maxie Cole. Tell us a little bit about the mission of Soul Survivors of Chicago and how your organization supports youth and families.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And good evening, everyone. It is my pleasure to be with you this evening. I want to thank the Connection and Social Action Committee with Psi Epsilon Omega chapter. I am just touched and just so honored that you all are viewing this very important documentary that I did not even know I would even do. But our mission at Soul Survivors of Chicago is to educate and advocate to provide awareness in regards to suicide prevention, and also talking about the impact of trauma that it has in our communities. Soul Survivors was started approximately 3 months, really and truly, after my son's death. And I really wanted to continue his legacy. So Soul Survivors started with just me looking down in his room and seeing his shoe and saying, wouldn't it be great if I could take his shoe, sanitize it, make it clean, and put his name in it and gift it to someone with the understanding they'll be walking in the shoe of my son, who no longer is here, so therefore walk in purpose. So with that, we do a lot of education and awareness regarding suicide prevention and the impact it has in our communities.
Thank you so much. Okay, one more question. Of course, folks, we want you to start putting additional questions in the chat. I see one so far, but keep loading us up because we want to make sure we're able to answer questions that you have as well. What type of action or services would you recommend we, as concerned citizens, encourage lawmakers and school systems to implement in support of our youth?
Very good question. Thank you for asking. The first thing is that what I have learned is that suicide prevention and the need to study and to understand what is happening in our community is lowly funded, not very well supported, and often put to the back burner. So for legislation and those powerful persons in your community to continue the conversation and normalizing the importance of knowing that, hey, we need to understand what is going on with our children. My son's first attempt was at 12. 6 years later, my son has passed. And because there is a strong incident of you having a second attempt after your first, and knowing that we're seeing these rises in our community, I definitely urge you to go to your legislation, go to your city council, go to your local religious leaders and say, we need to have more conversations to normalize this topic is so important, because I don't know anyone in this world who hasn't been to a point and said, I get tired. And when we get tired, we think other ways. For my son, he took his life. For others, we have supports. But we need to research this. We need to have more funding in regards to the importance of knowing what is going on and really being a forefront in this. The second thing I would always say is that it's so vital for our school systems to understand that mental health is just as important as our standards with education, our benchmarks when it comes to graduation, because your mental health is your wealth. Your mental health is your education. Nothing else makes you more richer or more ability to thrive. So therefore, having assessments and being able to talk about what we can do with those children starting at a very, very young age, 5 years old and going forward is vital. And then also funding those grassroots organizations that are doing the legwork out there, pressing the word around, making sure that we have those supports available through capacity building and the likes. So those are my three things I would think would be great.
Thank you so much. Okay, and on this third question, I'm going to ask that we also bring in Mrs. Willard Robinson. So for the third question I have, let's get into some of the discussions about, like, one of the prominent myths about youth suicide is that there are always signs, right? You say in the film that Jamal gave no indication that he was planning to take his own life. What is the most common myth, or what are some of the most common myths about about suicide among our youth that we and what can we do to dispel them? So I'll start with you, Mrs. Maxie Cole, and then Mrs. Willard Robinson, please jump in.
One of the things I'm learning is that many people think suicide is always associated or a cousin to mental health and illness or mental um, um, conditions, but that's not very true. And what that myth suggests is that persons who complete suicide are dealing with a mental illness. What I know by fact, and I gotta believe in the soul of my heart for my son, is that my son did not want to die. He wanted to end his suffering. There was a point in time when that tunnel, whatever that feeling was a real thing. And the light at the end of the tunnel was an illusion. But the reality is that the tunnel is the illusion and the light is real. So that myth about having mental illness or always dealing with depression associates with persons who are thinking of with ideations of suicide may not always be true. One more thing that's very important to note is that within suicide, talking about it, it does not dispel, it does not cause another person to think or plan if you speak about it and try to normalize the conversation. So those are things that I think are important to know.
Hi, good evening. Yes, there are pretty much, I guess, from what I understand and have read, there are a few common myths, and one is that, again, talking about suicide increases of chances a person will act on it, and basically the studies have shown that talking about suicide may reduce rather than increase suicidal ideation. Another myth is people who talk about suicide are just seeking attention. The factors regarding that is people who die from suicide have often told someone about not wanting to live anymore, or they do not see the future. So it's important to take anyone that's saying this seriously, because they may not necessarily just are seeking attention. Another myth is suicide can't be prevented. The fact is suicide is preventable, but unpredictable. And most people who contemplate suicide often experience intense emotional pain, such as my son, the day he completed suicide. And another myth is people who take their own lives are selfish, cowards, or weak. And the fact is, people do not die of suicide by choice. Often people who die of suicide experience significant emotional pain and find it difficult to consider different views or see a way out of the situation. They're thinking only of this moment, not beyond. For example, my son's, Miss Maxie Coles, I happen to have learned why my son did it that day, what triggered him. Unfortunately, and you're right, knowing does not make it any easier. It clarifies some things, but it doesn't make it any easier. His trigger that day was the loss of a relationship. His girlfriend was the one who called me that morning to say, I just broke up with Justice and I think he's going to harm himself. And the way I said that was the way she said it. And it stabbed me because she said it just like she's saying the sky is blue. But to my son, who worshiped her and who was the cause of a lot of pain for him. That's how she said it. But to him, that's if he's planning a life with her or whatever, it's life shattering to him at that moment. And having access to lethal means, unbeknownst to us, didn't help that situation either. Another myth is teenagers and college students are most at risk for suicide. And the suicide rate for this age group is below the national average, but suicide risk does increase with age. So those are a few common myths that are published in published studies. I won't go through all of them, but those are some key myths.
Thank you both. I see several questions popping up in the chat, so I'm going to ask Julie, can you read one of the questions from the chat for me?
Absolutely. A topic that was discussed in the documentary was that Black men and women in our society are taught to suppress their emotions. If we have a loved one who we believe is contemplating suicide, but won't share their feelings around it, how can we offer support without overstepping their boundaries?
I love that question. I really love that question. Thank you so much for sharing that. May I share what I learned, if I may? um, I don't know a king, a queen, I don't know a president or a regular person that hasn't said, this is tough. Life is hard. I don't want to do this. I am scared. And you can complete the blanks after that. When you can connect with somebody to understand that I've had that experience too, and I want you to, I want to share with you what I did with that experience. Do you have that feeling, or have you had that understanding, or has that come to you? Then it brings a connection that makes it a lot more tangible than I'm on one side of the fence or the one island and you are not. I wish I could have told my son all the things that I went through as a parent just to raise him to understand and let him understand that I've been there too, son. Whatever that road and whatever that storm is, I've been in it and I've been in a hurricane with it. But I didn't get to have that conversation. So for anyone who's asking, how do you do that? Understanding that it's okay to not be okay and continue that conversation as if you definitely can relate to what you may think they're going through and bring a natural normalization to it. And then with that, I think the conversation flies like wind.
Mrs. Willard Robinson, do you have anything?
Yes, some things that I've learned from the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, because that's the organization that I started working with after my son passed. They really provided a lot of information and so much that I would tell anyone, educate yourself so that you can find out how to use the proper words when you speak with someone, and ask them open-ended questions about how they're feeling. So that, for example, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention suggests ask about their day. Find a way to have an open question about them. Start with observation rather than unloading everything that concerns them. You want to just make sure that you're allowing them to express themselves, to share what it is they're feeling, and reassure them that they can trust you with what they're sharing with you, so that they will open up to you. And you also have to, find the right time to talk with them. And find a moment, just to basically give them plenty of room to share information with you and talk to you.
Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to read another question from our list, and then we'll go back to the chat. So youth suicide is increasing at an alarming rate, especially boys, even among girls. How can we attack the stigma surrounding mental health to hopefully prevent suicide? And actually, Mrs. Willard Robinson, I'm going to start with you, and then I'll come to you, Mrs. Maxey Polk.
I would say the stigma regarding it, it's important to keep talking about it. And I say this because the more we talk about suicide, mental health, it opens up conversations. When News 4 did the story on my son about suicide, a lot of people opened up, and when we did the walk at Bowie State, a lot of people came out and said that day, I'm so glad you're doing this. You know, it helps me talk about it. People that I did not know from our city council members, they all shared their stories. And people doing so, people can realize that you're not alone. Everyone has feelings or certain things that have happened to them. The way you can reduce the stigma is by talking, sharing, and then the more people are sharing, they can say, well, this person is having a problem. It's not just me. I'm not different. It's regular people having problems, and I can relate to that. Those are the things that I think, and then having someone, for example, the news person on the news say, you know, my father passed away from suicide. You know, it's not, so people can know it happens in other families. The more you are open with it and share, and that's why I'm transparent, because um members from my church said, well, we won't tell anyone what happened. And I said, I don't want to do that because that's not going to help anyone. But I think just being transparent and open, and when you're transparent and open, people will open up to you. And I think that's one of the most natural, organic ways to try to end the stigma. And that, and educating yourself so that you understand, or in general, family members understand, you need to talk about it. If you don't talk about it, if you're hiding it, we're never going to get any place with this.
Mrs. Maxwell?
Yes, I would definitely ditto what, excuse me, excuse me, I'm so sorry, with Miss Janice and what she spoke about in regards to just being able to talk about it. The fact is that this is not a comfortable subject, okay? Because suicide is permanent. Problems are temporary. Suicide is permanent. I can never have those conversations I wanted with my son because that decision is permanent. But the problems are temporary. They might have a longevity in some way and maybe impact you in some parts of your life, but they get a temporary spot in your movement as you go through your life, in your longevity. So to understand, to talk about it and know that you can say it in those specific words, and understanding that this stigma is so thick that I think many of us want to find someone who has experienced something to say, oh, this happened to me too, you know, and then you can share the story and it just rolls like, you know, the grapevine. And I'm sure that we've all, you know, been connected once we shared something we've experienced to someone else who's experienced it too, whether it be cancer, whether it be a car accident, whether it be having a common cold. So if we can do it in those aspects, we can definitely do it with this situation. But being mindful that it is a very touching subject because it talks about something you cannot change. And a lot of people don't get that part. So understanding that that's the way to go about the stigmas of it. Yeah.
I would also add having conversations in places of worship, because a lot of this, people think we shouldn't talk about it. So having the churches, having church leadership bring about it, because a lot of people put a lot of faith and trust in their leaders in the church. Having the leaders being willing to speak about it with the congregation, that would go a long way as well, because it would also take the stigma out of, keep it at a secret. You can't, yes, you can pray about it, but you need to do more things than just pray about it. We have to speak about it. And for example, the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention offers something, Soul Shop in the Black church and Soul Shop in the community. That is a program to help educate leadership, clergy, and faith-based leaders about how to speak with their congregation about suicide and mental illness. And also there's a program to train community leaders as well. So I think those things will help in the stigma. We can talk about it, as Ms. Maxey says, it's like a common cold. We can start just talking about it.
Excellent. Elise, could you read another question from the chat for me, please?
Sure. Let's see. I'm looking at Soul Shop for Community. I don't see a question, but I do see Changing Minds, NBC, 4 segment featuring Sora Janice Willard.
I think
There's a question that says, are there questions that should be asked to check in to see if a young person is at risk of harming themselves?
either of
Ms.
you.
Mexico's, did you want to start or?
I can. I
Okay.
know that my experience and what I do play back in my mind is noticing the differences that you see in their behaviors. If there's an isolation that's happening a lot more than other times, that's a red flag. If there's
Yes.
more social media interaction than personal, that's a sign. If they start telling you it doesn't matter anymore, or start giving things away to friends, maybe even not even wanting to do the natural things they used to do. Those are the signs. So those things come up, and then you get those, what do I say kind of questions. And what I can always tell people is that you tell them what you notice. I noticed that you're wearing black all day. You used to wear pink. I noticed that you don't like to talk to such and such anymore. And now she can't get you anymore. Those kind of things. And that can open up doors of conversation. But definitely just watching and being a good navigator to, the differences, and letting them know that you're seeing and invested in that change that they're displaying. Yeah.
You actually hit the ones I was going to reference. Um, One other one that's important when someone is talking about being a burden to others, feeling trapped, or having no reason to live, that is a key one because, or significant changes in eating or sleeping habits. Though that's a sign also isolating from family or friends. And I'll just reference the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention notes. Ways you can help with this is to develop coping and problem solving skills, encourage connections to family, friends, and community, support access to healthcare, nurture supportive relationships with family members and other trusted adults, and you want to restrict access to weapons, toxic substances, or medications. So it's important to kind of think about those things if you're feeling that someone may be showing some concerning behavior. Those are some things to keep in mind. And you also want to be aware of some common risk factors. Mental health conditions such as depression, social isolation, family or peer conflicts, bullying, experience with racism or discrimination, and previous struggles with suicidal thoughts or attempts. And I say that one because someone says something or does something, as Ms. Maxey has noted before, as in my son, he had an ideation with suicide from 2.5 years prior. That ideation doesn't go away, so it's important. So if someone says something, don't just think, oh, they're over that. You want to pay attention to that and them and their behavior. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And as we start to transition to talk a little bit about resources, let's hit on a very, very important one as it relates to reports that have come out. So Ring the Alarm report was a report that was developed by congressional members, and Still Ringing the Alarm report is a follow-on that was developed by Johns Hopkins, warned that the crisis associated, or the crisis of youth suicide, is worsening, and it has done so post-COVID. What would you say to those who don't believe that this crisis is real? And I will start with you, Mrs. Maxey Cole.
I got two responses for that question. The first thing I would say to someone for them not being aware of the reality of this is that I am actually a statistic. My son's life, his challenges his first attempt at 12, all the way down to the all the red tape with the mental health system, down to him dying. That is me that you're looking at when you look at those numbers. So therefore, it is real. The second thing I would say is that to be quite honest with you, it doesn't it's such a touchy subject to the point where I think people don't want it to be real. I think that it becomes, and I don't want it to be real. In fact, I would love our mission to be that we work so hard that we don't have to exist anymore. So to move forward with it is to be able to understand that this is a real thing. And then in hindsight, the African American community has been so not able to access the mental health systems and have the resources like other communities, to where we just have to deal with things on our own. So therefore, we are isolated in these different islands dealing with the same thing. So therefore, our experiences may seem just like one experience, but it's happening to your neighbor, it's happening to the, church member, it's happening to the cousin, it's happening to your work co-workers. It's happening, and it's happening every day. It takes a village to raise a child, but it takes a child to teach a village. And it's just our time to kind of look and kind of explore that and really look at what they're telling us, because it just transpires into what we're seeing right now with the pandemic of suicide rising. Yeah.
And and if someone doesn't want to believe it's real, they can educate themselves by looking up the studies from the CDC, SAMHSA. A lot of agencies are publishing these statistics, so it is real. It's on the news. It's in different places. It's it's hard to believe that people would think it's not real, because it's, as you said, it is landing very close to home in a lot of different places. And there's studies that American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, they're all tracking this, and they're now tracking it by rates. The states are tracking it. So there are a lot of, that's a lot of it. When someone would say it's not, I have several studies we can direct them to show that it is real. And now that they're tracking a lot by race and age, you can see that it's also happening in our community. It's not just a certain race or a certain other race's problem. It's our kids are doing this also.
Thank you so much. So one of the key things that is so important about having the both of you here is that each of you in your own way have turned your pain into a passion to assist in the community and make sure you are doing your own version of ringing the alarm to make sure your communities know specifically about what's going on and how they need to engage, and being willing and open to provide tools and resources to people so they can start to get engaged, look, see, help, and just work with our youth to ensure they understand there are alternatives to suicide when they hit those dark places. So Ms. Maxie Cole, I want to just go to you for just a second if there are a few resources you want to highlight, and then Mrs. Willard Robertson, I'm coming to you.
Well, we definitely know the National Suicide Prevention Hotline is in stand, and definitely the go-to when it comes to an immediate need, whether you are with a suicidal ideation, or you're in a suicidal crisis. That 1-800-273-8255 number is the key. Now we have 988, which has been really promoted as much as possible, and we're still in 1 year of it being implemented throughout the United States. If you're a veteran and you call that number, you'll be directly transferred to the National Veterans Suicide Prevention Hotline. And it's trying to bring together the importance of saying, instead of calling 911, let's call 988. Let's get some trained professionals to walk through or give you the resource that you need. So that's one really important resource I really look to talk about. NAMI is the National Association of Mental
Illness.
Illness, sorry. Long night.
Exactly.
As well as SAMHSA are our go-tos right now. And then us in the Black community, we have so many pockets and grassroots organizations. Janice has started a foundation, I believe, and I have Soul Survivors, and we're just trying to get our point across and let it be known that the African American community has something to say. I'm tired of being on the menu. I want to be at the table. I want to be at the table because these things are impacting us more than any other ethnicity. And we just need to be more aware that we can provide resources to our community as well. So we do gun locks here at Soul Survivors of Chicago and distribution of those. The mental health wellness kits we provide, and we go to certain communities that are not always targeted, like the barbershop or maybe the local wine and liquor store or somebody's local bodega. We want to be visible to the people and let them know where the resources are. So Soul Survivors is another resource. But yes, those are three that I would recommend.
Thank you. Mrs. Willard Robertson.
Miss Maxie Cole's covered 988. I was definitely going to say that's a big one. I'll speak to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention because that's where I started with them, and I'm still targeting most of my effort with them because they are a national organization and they have a lot of resources. So what I've focused on is making sure I belong to the Maryland chapter, and but I try to make sure we get resources in the African American community. And I actually joined the board. They asked me to become a board member, and I was hesitant to do that because I didn't want to be limited by certain things, but it actually helped me out because I now get to say in some of the things that we're bringing to the community, like Soul Shop. So it's helpful to do that, and I will work to do more of that. So my thing is making sure the community knows we have these resources, telling them about it until people come, because I do know things I've learned since losing our justice. If I wake up every day and I often say, if I had just known a fraction of this, maybe I could have had a different conversation. Maybe I could have said something different, done something different. I know I try not to go down that path too far, but I do feel that way because this information is so useful and it's written in layman's terms. I'll be happy to share resources after, but the pamphlets that they provide, it's very descriptive on how to help, what to say. They give you scripts so a family member can read directly from it and get some good information on how to help their loved ones, especially their youth. And that's my passion, just to make sure another mother will not have to say, I just didn't know about this, because you will know if you're around me. I'm going to make sure. So.
And we will continue to stay engaged with both of these activists, because that is exactly what you are. Because of course, Ms. Willard Robinson has mentioned Soul Shop. She's very active in that space, and we are going to start engaging with her. And although she's a little too bashful to mention, Mrs. Rafia Maxie Cole is trying to spread soul survivors all across the country and is hoping to start opening up facilities such as that in the Maryland, DC area. Okay. So we want to make sure we continue to stay engaged and give whatever assistance we can to these women as they continue to spread the word and break down the stigma associated with suicide. All right. So with that, Dr. Magency, I'm going to hand it back over to you for next steps.
Good evening. Tiffany, would you like to go to the letter campaign first?
Yes, I can. Thank you very much. Okay, so now it's time to act. We've given you all the information, and we don't do any of these without a call to action. There is a piece of legislation that was introduced in Congress in the last session that specifically speaks to providing or having counselors instead of cops, because we know in a lot of schools there are various resource managers or resource advocates versus counselors. And based on some of the things that you've heard today, it is clear that a lot of times understanding depression, trauma, and anxiety, there aren't any unique signs associated with that. but sometimes that might look like acting out, such as fighting bad behavior in school. So, it's really important that funding is made available nationwide to provide counseling to students so we can find alternatives to address these sorts of behaviors and possibly help prevent, really negative outcomes. So counseling to criminalization in schools is the name of the bill that we are asking each and every one of you to help us encourage our congressional members to reintroduce in this Congress. Because as you can see, this sort of legislation is needed at all levels of education and of course beyond that. So if this is something that we can do through our advocacy, of course, this is what we want to do. So I believe the link associated with this particular campaign, social action campaign, will be included or listed in the chat. And of course, for those of you who are following Psi Epsilon Omega chapter, we will have all of these resources and information available on our connection and social action page after this event. Okay. So as we wrap up this evening's event, again, a big shout out and thank you to Mrs. Rafia Maxey Cole, as well as Mrs. Willard Robinson. We within Psi Epsilon Omega, in partnership with We Can, continue to do the work that we can do to find innovative ways to get the message of social issues out to people and get action within our community. So this is, of course, the second in our series of movie nights. And we have a third coming up in October that will be related to water pollution. And on behalf of Psi Epsilon Omega chapter and We Can, we wanted to make sure we ended this event with a donation to Soul Survivors for $500, following up on the expansion project. So Ms. Rafia Maxey Cole, again, thank you so much for the information you've shared this evening. You'll be getting a check in the mail shortly, but we did want to make sure that we put our money literally where our mouth is on this. So we will continue to be following up with you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you. And thank you all for this evening and this important discussion. May I just end with today, I've been waiting for the last couple of weeks when I've met Ms. Crawford. And tomorrow is my son's birthday. He would have been 23 years old. It's been 3 years now since he's passed away. And the work that you all are doing just shows and makes me feel on days like tomorrow to get up and keep moving. So I thank you for the action that you're putting into this cause. I greatly thank you from the bottom of my heart.
And happy birthday to Jamal. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mrs. Willard Robinson, do you have any closing remarks to share?
Miss Maxey Cole, it was such an honor to meet you, and I'm sorry we share a similar story, but I was listening to your story. Your son reminds me so much of my son. It was just, I was just like, oh my gosh, I know they probably would have been friends.
They would
So
have. They
they,
look alike in
they do.
everything. They do.
They do. They do. And they similar. So it's so similar tendencies and things that people are saying about your son. They said the same thing. So it's been an honor to hear for you to share your story. And I'll be in touch with you. I'll be in touch.
Definitely me as well.
And thank
Thank
you
you.
everyone for allowing us to share our stories. I appreciate it. And we'll be in touch with more events.
Thank you.